The story goes that the Holy Baal Shem Tov, before he passed away, gathered his disciples, his Talmidim around himself, and he told them a story. In this story which he related, he outlined, he predicted the primary events that would happen in the lives of each one of his Talmidim until their passing, until they would pass away. Those disciples, those Talmidim who were present at that point and were part of that story, for the decades after, when they would meet, they would ask each other, "Vu halstu in the Massei? Where are you? Vu halstu in the Massei? Where are you holding in the story?" In other words, where are you holding in the process of your life? So there's a story about the Alter Rebbe. Of course, the author of the Sefer Likutei Torah, the Maamar Aile, written by his grandson, by the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, but they are nevertheless Maamar of the Alter Rebbe, that at a certain point in his life, he traveled to Eretz Yisrael. He made the decision to go to Eretz Yisrael, to Israel. The reason for this decision was, of course, that his Rebbe, Reb Mendel Vitebsk, Reb Mendel of Horodok, was traveling to Eretz Yisrael as the leader of a contingent of Chassidim who were chosen, elected by the community of Chassidim, by the leaders of Chassidim at that point, to go and transplant and to establish a Chassidic community in the Holy Land. At that point, 3 great tzaddikim traveled: Reb Mendel of Horodok, Reb Avram Kalisker, and Reb Yisrael of Polotsk. They were all Rebbes in Russia. And as it would have it, the Alter Rebbe would by default take over their positions and ultimately become, as the Rebbe Mezritcher Maggid once referred to him, the Rav Begans Reisen, the Rav over all of Russia, because all the other Hasidic Rebbes, for one reason or another, evacuated Russia. But at that point, which was around 1777, 1778, the Alter Rebbe said he's going along. Why? The Alter Rebbe at that point was in his early 30s. And he argued, Chayecha Koidmin, a person has a right to think about himself first, and he, in quotes, still needs a Rebbe. He felt like he still needed a Rebbe. Reb Mendel Vitebsk, Reb Mendel Horodok was his Rebbe. His Rebbe was traveling to Eretz Yisrael, he was going to travel with him. And he actually sold his house and his belongings, and he traveled quite a distance. Eventually, he was talked out of making the trip, mostly because of the pressure of the white Russian Hasidim who came complaining that you make us into Hasidim in the hub, in the stronghold of Misnagdim. And then you abandon us to our fate, and who's going to look after us, who's going to lead us, who's going to protect us, and so on. Reb Mendel Vitebsk, his Rebbe at that point, encouraged him to go back. But one of the details of this story is that in one particular place, as they were traveling, Reb Mendel Vitebsk encountered the Toldus Yankov Yosef, Rabbi Yankov Yosef of Polno. Rabbi Yankov Yosef of Polno was from the oldest of the holy Talmidim of the Holy Baal Shem Tov. I've heard it been said that he was over 100 when he passed away. That he was older than the Baal Shem Tov. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. But he certainly was a sage. He was a very elderly man. And he was a Godel and a Kaddish. He met Reb Mendel Vitebsk. And as was the custom of Talmidei Baal Shem Tov on such occasions, he asked his friend, Reb Mendel Vitebsk. Reb Mendel Vitebsk was one of the youngest people by the Holy Baal Shem Tov. He was really a disciple of the Maggid. He had been by the Baal Shem Tov several times, but he was mostly a Talmud of the Maggid. But apparently he was there at the Histalkus, and he's part of the story. So the Toldus Yankov Yosef said to Reb Mendel Vitebsk, "Vu haltst in the Massei? Where are you holding in the story?" And Reb Mendel Vitebsk responded, "Ich halten foreign ken Eretz Yisrael. I'm on my way to the Holy Land, Eretz Yisrael." So the Toldus said to him, "Oy bazoi, vu is the younger man, was teirosai is meir miseife elim vat seife." If this is the case, that you're on your way to the Holy Land, where is the young man whose Torah shines and radiates from one end of the world to the other end of the world? And the Mendel Vitebsk pointed at the Alter Rebbe. The Toldus was very old at this point, and he had very long eyebrows, like the Gemara says about Rabbi Yechon, he had very long eyebrows. And he couldn't see unless he would raise up his eyebrows. The Pasha blocked his eyes. He raised up his eyebrow. He looked at the Alter Rebbe and he approved that this was a young man whose Torah is Meir Miseife Levad Seife, and he was very instrumental in encouraging the Alter Rebbe to go back and settle in White Russia. And of course, he moved back from. He was originally in Liadi, and as the story goes, he returned to Liadi because of the feelings of Hakaras Hatev and so on, as the stories are recorded in the history. Life is a journey. There's a journey. The Holy Baal Shem Tov says that the journey of life is represented by these psukim. Aile Massei b'nei Yisrael asher yatzu me'eretz Mitzrayim b'yad Moshe v'Aaron. The Jewish people make 42 stops on the way to the Holy Land. The 43rd stop will be on the opposite bank of the Yarden. So the Baal Shem Tov says the life of a person is 42 journeys, 42 stops, at the end of which the neshama returns to Gan Eden. The Baal Shem Tov says from the moment the person opens his eyes and says Meidani, until he closes his eyes at night when he says B'yodcha afkid ruchi padisi oite the Shem kelemes, is 42 stops. And the Baal Shem Tov says that the entire history of the Jewish nation is also 42 journeys. So the story of our Parsha, Aile Massei b'nei Yisrael, is not simply a historic event that the Torah records. The Jewish people stops and starts their journeys. Vayisu, vayachanu, vayisu, vayachanu. But there is incredible relevance to this record, because hidden in this record are the 42 stops a person makes each day, the 42 stops a person makes in his lifetime, and the 42 stops we make over the course of our history. But in the case of Reb Mendel of Vitebsk, in the case of Reb Mendel of Haradok and the Toldos Yankov Yosef, they knew the stops. They knew where they have to stop and where they have to start again. We don't know our journey. We don't know our path. God leads us on this path. The steps of man are predetermined by God Almighty. And perhaps we lack the appreciation of the fact that one of the great goodnesses, one of the great kindnesses, one of the great gifts that God Almighty has given us is that we cannot see the future. When you're traveling on a road, you can see what's ahead of you. But what's going to happen tomorrow is impossible to know. A lot of us feel like if we knew what our future was, we would be able to plan for it. If we knew our future, we'd be frozen, we'd be immobilized by fear, by terror, by a sense of all the negative things that may come our way. So we don't know our journey, but we journey nevertheless. And of course, the task of a person is, the job of a person is, the responsibility of a person is that when God Almighty brings us to a certain place and we rest, we have work to do. He brings us there, and the work that must be done in that location is our own to achieve or to miss, to use the opportunity, to fail the opportunity. And that's how Chassidus explains the relevance of this pasuk, Aile Massei b'nei Yisrael, asher yatzu me'eretz Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim means a constraint, a narrowness, a limitation. And a person spends his entire life breaking barriers, pushing his own limits, pushing the limits of the world on his journey towards the Holy Land, on his journey towards achieving the ultimate purpose and end for which his neshama was born. And ultimately, it's in our best interest not to know the journey, but the journey is nevertheless unfolding. The journey is nevertheless happening, and we must take advantage of the opportunities that come our way as we make our steps in that direction. And that's the challenge of life. The challenge of life is not to try and control it. We have to manage it, but not control it. The Eibush does what he wishes, and to react, to respond to the choices the Eibush makes, whether they're comfortable or not comfortable, whether they're agreeable or not agreeable, and to take advantage of the situation that Almighty puts us in at each step, at each stop, at each point in our lives, and use it maximally to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to make a didaleis Baruch B'tachteinim, and to bring joy to the world and to ourselves, and so forth. When we talk about this journey, there are two ways of appreciating this journey. that are both legitimate, that are not contradictory, but they are quite distinct. They're quite different. And that is, we can perceive, we can envisage, we can understand our journey as our own personal journey, our own personal struggle, our own personal structure for growth and success and so forth. And we can also define our journey by the impact that we have on the world, by what we leave behind, how we affect others, and the good that we do, and so on. In other words, there is the idea of Likutei Torah for the neshama's ascent through this descent. And there's, of course, the broader Likutei Torah for the world at large. When we do what we need to do, we're elevating HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world. And there's no question that in this pasuk, Aile Massei is represented both of these aspects. The aspect of our journey that elevates the world at large, and the aspect of our journey as it raises us up and brings us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu into our end, in a positive way. As Chassidus explains, the neshama starts out in Gan Eden, and it's in a wonderful place. And the neshama is really not given a choice to come into this life and into this world. And in this world, the neshama flexes its muscles. In this world, the neshama's full potential is realized. The full gevura, the full power of the neshama that in Gan Eden was never materialized, because Gan Eden was so spiritually compatible with the neshama's interest that the neshama didn't have to work very hard to achieve its end. But in this world, where there's a great incompatibility between the world at large and the neshama must compensate and overcome and so on, the neshama's full potential is realized, like you have in Chassidus, based on the pasuk V'olakim Nisas Avram. God Almighty tests Avram Avinu, and the question is asked by all the Rishonim. Hashem is testing Abraham. Hashem does not know how he's going to score. Hashem doesn't know who Avram Avinu is. Hashem doesn't know his level and his station and his condition. What does that mean? Hashem is testing Avram Avinu, and if he wouldn't test Avram Avinu, we wouldn't know Avram Avinu is holding and standing. And of course, there's several answers to that question. One of those answers to that question is that Avakim Nisas Avram, maybe Hashem, God Almighty, is showing Avram Avinu off to the rest of the world. And another Avakim Nisas Avram is being challenged so that his potential should be realized. Or to say it differently, Avakim Nisas Avram, Hashem is testing Avram, so Avram should discover the full potential of what Avram Avinu has based on the gifts HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him. Similarly, the journey of life is Likutei Torah. The neshama in this world is challenged. It overcomes this challenge, or these challenges, and reveals its full potential. And that's the Pshat Aile Massei. The Parsha, the Pasuk, the story of Aile Massei is about the journeys that occurred, and the journeys that are occurring, and the journeys that will continue to occur. That's Aile Massei B'nai Yisrael. This Maamar does not discuss the Likutei Torah, the journey in as much as it's elevating the world, but rather this Maamar is discussing the Aile Massei in terms of the effect that it has on the person. How in our own lives there is a journey of Likutei Torah. Now, I'm going to begin the Maamar now, but I want to say one little statement before, and that is, as you can tell, this is a short Maamar. And from the little bit that I was able to collect from the Maamar Aile, from the Ha'aretz, is this Maamar is a Lozhner Maamar. It's a pre-Peterburg Maamar. It's a Maamar from the earlier years of the Alter Rebbe's Nesias. And the Maamar has no haskalah. There's no scholarship. There's no philosophy in this Maamar. There's just avodah. There's just life. And as I've explained to you on previous occasions, oftentimes you read the pre-Peterburg Maamarim, they seem so simple, because we're not even understanding how much we don't understand how profound these Maamarim are. Because this same Maamar could have been repeated by the Alter Rebbe years later, and it would be very mystical and very scholarly and very intellectual and very challenging. And in fact, in this Maamar is written all of that scholarship. But as was the tradition in the pre-Peterburg Maamarim, the Alter Rebbe did not spell out the Haskalah, he just got to the point, and Chassidim had to understand the Haskalah themselves. In other words, this Maamar is very easy, but it's deceptively easy. It's really not easy. And the Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe were great enough not to be deceived. So we're ready to start. And let me just, so to speak, give you the point, the punchline of this entire Maimed before we even begin. The point of this Maimed is that this is a personal journey. And the personal journey involves growth. A certain dimension of this growth is entirely our own. It's obviously that dimension of growth which we can handle on our own, which means, in other words, it's the lowest things that we'll ever achieve in our lives, which we're capable of doing on our own without any help from the outside. That's the first dimension of this journey. At a certain point, we're going to reach a certain level where to grow beyond that, we need help. And the help we get from Moshe and Aaron, and that's how you read this pasuk, Aile Massei b'nei Yisrael asher yotzu me'eretz Mitzrayim. There's the journey of a person's life, and then there's the Biyad Moshe v'Aaron, where the second stage of this journey involves the help that we get from Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen. And as you'll see the Maimed in Mitzvah Hashem, as we'll discuss it as we learn, the irony is that the assistance, let me say it differently, the avodah that we do on our own, which is the lowest level of avodah, is in a way the most critical, the most serious, the most important, notwithstanding that it's the lowest levels. And the Biyad Moshe v'Aaron, the journeying to higher levels, which is impossible for us to do without assistance from the outside, is a higher and a more meaningful level and step of growth. But it will never take away from the fundamental or the fundamental nature of the initial avodah, which we do entirely on our own. So that's how you have to read this Maimed. This is a Maimed about us. It's a Maimed about life. It's a Maimed about our journey. And the Maimed begins, Aile Massei b'nei Yisrael. These are the journeys of the Jewish people. And it might as well be me and you. Asher yotzu me'eretz Mitzrayim. We're going out of the land of Egypt. That means to say a land of containment and constraint and limitation, to become ultimately free in the Holy Land in Eretz Yisrael. And the pasuk concludes, Biyad Moshe v'Aaron, was done with the assistance of Moshe and Aaron. And of course the question is, the Jewish people journeyed out of Egypt because God took them out of Egypt. Why is it necessary to point out that this was done b'yad, with the hand or the support of Moshe and Aaron? So to answer this question, the Rebbe begins, Ksiv, means another pasuk, Nachisa katseina mach. You led your nation like a flock of sheep. And then you add b'yad Moshe v'Aaron, and you did it with the assistance of Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron HaKohen. And again, the question is, what is wrong with letting a Jew journey on his own? What's the b'yad Moshe v'Aaron? And the Rebbe answers on line 3, Hinizeh klal gadol b'veidas Hashem yisbarech. All of us know and understand with common sense. But this is especially understood when we learn these ideas in Torah. The Torah says as a rule, Shekol mishe boladov ke'elav yisbarech. When one wishes to become attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the final destination of the journey of our lives, to become attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is, if you will, the 43rd step, Hine. Ksiv, it says in the pasuk, Mi yalamar Hashem, how can one ascend to the mountain of God? Mi yakum b'mkeim kacher, who can stand in his holy place? In other words, how can one deserve an intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the highest level, or the end point of the struggle and the growth of life? And the pasuk answers, Neki chapayim avar levav. You need clean hands and a transparent heart, a pure heart. In other words, one's heart must be bare and pure, completely. Without any deficiencies whatsoever, without any glitches. And we're talking about a person who has never raised up nafshi, his soul, lashav, futilely, in a false way, in a meaningless way. Now the simple taich asher le nosa lashav nafshi means he has not raised up, so to speak, the spirit of the one saying this kapitel. In other words, Hashem, God. Not, it doesn't say asher le nosa lashav nafshoy. He hasn't raised up his soul for naught, but asher lashav nafshi. So the Rebbe brings from the klolim of diktuk, nafshay ksiv, nafshi kri. It's actually written with a vav, and it's pronounced with a yud. It's written as if it were to say nafshay, the soul of the person, and it's read as if it says nafshi, so to speak, the soul of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because when a person raises up his own soul, he's raising up the godliness within himself. And Eshelenosa Lashav Nafshoy, and Eshelosa Lashav Nafshi means he hasn't raised up futilely his own neshama, which is the godliness within himself. Which goes, as the Pasuk says, Nafshi, I'll raise up to you my nefesh. And Akol Be'asar Shechin Tesharia. And when you have 10, the Shechina rests. So what is the meaning of the word that Eshelenosa Lashav Nafshi? The this means Shalei Tehei, that they should not allow that his his raising himself and his lifting himself in serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, l'shav v'sheker chas v'shalom, it should be neither futile nor false, God forbid. In other words, the meaning of the word Eshelenosa Lashav Nafshi means that as we grow spiritually, it's conceivable that our spiritual growth should be empty, false, without substance, which means to say in a basic level, that they're doing it for self-interest, doing it for honor, for some kind of a reciprocation, some kind of a return, rather than connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the real idea of getting close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu was Eshelenosa Lashav Nafshi v'lo nishba l'mir. So the Rebbe says of a Vadai, once we appreciate that in our growth upwards we have to be perfect, because of this principle, Eshelenosa Lashav Nafshi, that we're raising up ourselves to HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to be entirely l'shem shamayim. Madrega kezu, this step and this level, amuk miyim tzenu, it is so deep that it's beyond anybody's access. In other words, the likelihood of a human being approaching HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it should never be lashav, it should always be just for the sake of heaven, and not for their own sake, is very, very, very small. It's very, very unlikely. I would like to insert something right here, which I suppose in a couple of lines from now will take on a little bit more meaning, but I'm going to mention it now. There's an idea brought in Chassidus that there's something called klipas noiga, and that the animal soul, the nefesh abahamis of a yid, comes from klipas noiga. And it's brought about this nefesh abahamis of klipas noiga that it has two parts, toiv shebenoiga and rash shebenoiga, the good of klipa and the bad of klipas noiga. What's the difference in Tev Shabanega and Rasha Banega? So the answer is Tev Shabanega is the source of Sur Meirah, and Rasha Banega the source of Asay Tev. And what this means, as the Maamar explained it, that when a person is refraining from sinning, a person is stopping himself from doing an Aveda, it doesn't matter why. He could stop himself from doing an Aveda because someone walked in and caught him, so he stopped himself. Or there's the famous joke about this guy who learned for 10 years as a young married man because he thought his mother-in-law was checking in him all night, and after 10 years he discovered that it was the cat checking him on all the years. But that's in Asay Tei. But when it comes to Sur Meirah, when it comes to not sinning, it doesn't really matter why we don't sin as long as we don't sin. But when it comes to Asay Tei, when it comes to doing good, the motivation has to be ideal, has to be good. And if a person's motivation is wrong, it affects the deed. So Ya'ale B'Hara Deshem, the growth in a positive sense in connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu requires nikicha pa'im v'alevav. It requires they should have absolute integrity. But like Nosal Lashav Nafshi, a person cannot have an ulterior motivation. In other words, in as much as Sur Meirah is concerned, when I'm fighting with my Yetzer Hara not to sin, why I don't sin doesn't matter so much. But when I graduate that initial level, and I'm talking about a higher level of developing a more meaningful relation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this requires nekicha pa'im avar levav, and the Rebbe says it's impossible. And therefore, the Rebbe's solution is on line 7, the way this becomes possible is through the assistance of the category, of the level, of the themes of Moshe and Aaron. In other words, we're growing as human beings and growing as Jews. As you'll see in a moment, this growth has two stages. There's the lower level of growth, which is our own efforts. And because we're at a lower level and it's our own efforts, it doesn't matter if the growth is not ideal, not perfect. Beyond that, there's a second category of growth. The second category of growth requires perfection. And the Pasuk says it doesn't exist. And the answer, the means by which it becomes possible for one's second stage connectedness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be ideal is with the help of Moshe and Aaron. And we'll talk about it momentarily when we get to it. But let's read on. I'm on line 9. Tehine Neida Maamar Razal. All of us know What it says in the Mishnah, Pirkei Avos. Im ein yira in chokhmah. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. Im ein chokhmah in yira. There's no wisdom, there's no fear. Now that's circular. If fear cannot happen without wisdom, and wisdom can happen without fear, neither can happen. The question becomes, if you say you can't have fear without wisdom, and you cannot have wisdom without fear, it becomes impossible. One cannot be without the other. So how should a person begin to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And of course, all of us know the answer, that Yira means Yira Tata, and Chochma means Torah, and the second Yira means Yira Elohim. In Yira Tata, in Chochma you cannot learn Torah. In Chochma you have no Torah, and Yira you can't have Yira Elohim. It says in Tanya, for example, in chapter 23, and many places in Chassidus. Here he gives a similar answer, but slightly more involved. Ach Omru Chazal, the answer to this question is that there's two steps. There's a step where Yira comes first and then Chochma, and then there's a later step where Chochma comes first and then Yira. Only when one has fear of heaven, before he becomes smart and a learner of Torah. Chochma is the wisdom that he extracts from the Torah, has a kiyum because it's real. Otherwise, it doesn't have a kiyum. Pirush, this means, and Alter Rebbe immediately goes into the issue. Sheshnei minirah, there's two levels of evil. Or to put it into the language I gave you in my introduction, there's two basic stages to the journey of Aile Massei of a person's life. The first stage is Ha'alif, Huram Mamish, a person that's dealing with evil, with sin. Be'isir, and prohibited things, Afilu, Isser, Kalsha, Divrei Seifim. It doesn't matter whether it's a big Aveda or a so-called little Aveda, whether it's biblical or rabbinic. But Hurah Gomer, it's evil. It has to be fear of heaven before one's wisdom. A person has to keep his eyes pure from seeing evil, and he has to have the fear of heaven to prevent him from looking where he's not supposed to. And this evil thing is called what's abominable to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore a Jew needs to draw from inside of himself Yira and Kabbalah Seil, not to give into it. Says the Alter Rebbe, this requires no wisdom. Now to stay away from the stumbling blocks, from the challenges of evil, because it doesn't require wisdom, it requires toughness, it requires Kabbalah Seil. This Rabbi says the first step. And we all know the Yetzer Hara quite well. The Yetzer Hara we don't have to read about in books. The Yetzer Hara know because we deal with him on a daily basis. And the Yetzer Hara harasses us. And the Yetzer Hara wants us to not be Jewish. And first of all, to the very basic level, we should do sins. We should not do mitzvahs. We should skip mitzvahs. We should do everything with lifelessness and with lack of passion and so forth. We all know what Yetzer Hara is after. And he's after making us sin bepashtas. The Yetzer Hara wants to trip us up and make us do wrong. And for this, you don't need Moshe's help. You don't need Aaron's help. You don't need Chochmah. You need Yireh. The first level of Avodas Hashem requires Kabbalah Seil Malchus Shemaim, accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, gritting our teeth and not sinning. We're not talking here about high levels. We're not talking about advancements in spirituality. We're talking about baseline Yiddishkeit, Yiddish Shemayim. And I will be honest and state what all of us know who are American, that we hate this step. We love spirituality. We love the meaning of the loftier ideas of Yiddishkeit. The techno details, especially the don't do's, don't work for us. We're not motivated, not inspired by them, and they become very burdensome, very slowing us down from our spiritual journey. But if we're honest with ourselves, we know that you cannot have bays before Aleph. You can't be on the second floor before you climb out of the basement and climb from the first floor to the second floor. And the basement and the first floor is this Kabbalah Seil. The beginning of being a Jew is accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven, bittul, yira. And this bittul and yira is not fancy. It doesn't need Moshe Rabbeinu, it doesn't need Aaron HaKohen, it doesn't have to be perfect, it has to just be nish tzindikim. On the first level, nobody cares about motivation, all that matters is that he didn't do the Aveda. That's all. I believe I saw a letter from the Rebbe, but I may be confusing it with something that I heard. But that somebody was talking to the Rebbe about a certain challenge that he has, and the Rebbe wrote him a response, and one of the points the Rebbe wrote, what's wrong with Mashakosov Reish Perek Mamalef? Kabbalah Seil Machashmaim. God said, don't do it. Don't do it. It's as simple as that. A human being has control over himself. They said to you, it's wrong, don't do it. Just simply don't do it. But for so many of us, Americans, this is the most difficult thing. It is the basis of all of Yiddishkeit. As the previous Rebbe would call it, it's the Aleph base. It's the foundation. It's the fundamentals. But it's a difficult Aleph base. This idea of Yiras Shemaim and Kabbalah Seil. And the Rebbe, our Rebbe, on many, many occasions, talked about this need for discipline. The Rebbe made the Tzivus Hashem. He explained in a letter, which is now quite famous, why he made Tzivus Hashem. And if somebody complained to him why he's using the malal of a military, the Rebbe says, because I'm living in a society with a total breakdown of discipline, of respect, of shame. And I realize that the young people are growing up in a feral world, in a wild world, and they need to be re-constrained. They have to have shame and discipline and fear and responsibility. And the Rebbe said, the only model I found that represents these ideas is an army. Because in an army, the most important thing is as the Rebbe calls him, the commander-in-chief gives the order of the day. First of all, you have to listen. And when it comes to having to listen, it doesn't matter how you feel, it doesn't matter whether you agree, it doesn't matter whether it sits with you. This is what you need to do. And that's the first Madreg. And that's the pshat, the main yira, ein chachma. If there's no fear, there's no wisdom. And we don't have anybody's help. We need no one's help. But then comes the second Madreg, v'hamina beis. And I want to pause at this point. I want to tell you a story. I am not going to say names, although I know names, that I heard from somebody who was very close to the episode I'm about to share. And I want to use it as a catalyst, as a stepping stone to make a point. And really the point that I want to make is really to elaborate further on the point that I just completed. I know a person who was deeply involved in the Rebbe's initiative in the late 70s and early 80s for Jewish meditation. The Rebbe spoke Yud Beis Tammuz, I believe, this time of year, in 1979, that makes it 35 years ago, about the need for Jewish meditation. The Rebbe said meditation was very widespread, and a lot of the meditation was connected to Avodah Zarah, to idol worship, and the Rebbe said if we would give people healthy outlets and alternatives, they would use them, and they would use them in a constructive way. So the Rebbe had an initiative to begin a process of frum psychologists, mental health professionals, developing Jewish meditation so that it would help people. So I heard from one person who was involved that he left the initiative. He was a psychologist. He was a young psychologist, and the reason he left is because they weren't listening to the Rebbe. Those were his words to me. The Rebbe wanted Jewish meditation to be used only for medical purposes, for people who need it for medicine, for relaxation and for anxiety and stress. But the Rebbe made it very clear that he did not want Jewish meditation being used as a method of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He saw it as a medical issue, not as a religious issue, period. Jewish meditation is about, of course, about clearing your mind, as opposed to intellectually engaging. What we call Hisbonenus is not really meditation, it's contemplation. And the Rebbe didn't want it to be used as a method of Avodas Hashem. And some of the people involved in this initiative had other ideas. They didn't listen to the Rebbe. And one person told me he left the effort when people started to use it for other interests. But another person told me that they were involved in this effort. There was a person, a very, very famous and prominent Rav, who did a lot of wonderful things. And he was on the border of, Nigla and Nister, Litvische versus a Chassidishe background. And he was very, very into mysticism. And this person told me that she understood that he saw meditation as a medium for prophecy, as the step before enlightenment. And he wasn't a Lubavitcher, notwithstanding the Rebbe's strict instructions that the meditation should be used strictly and solely for medical purposes. This individual and other individuals began to use meditation as a derech and avodas Hashem. And in her words, this particular rabbi was in a very, very deep depression. A very, very deep depression. And he died. He died very young. And she said to me that she felt that this effort that he undertook was so emotionally exhausting that it killed him. This is a story that I heard firsthand from somebody who knows. Again, I'm not saying any names, and I don't intend on revealing neither my source nor who this is about. But I want to explore this. I want to explain this story. That person may very well be correct that meditation is a step towards prophecy. It's true. You know, in Chabad there's a phenomenon called hisboinenus. By Bresla there's a phenomenon called hisboidedus. The Rebbe mentions hisboidedus once. On his birthday, Yud Aleph Nisan, he talks about hisboidedus, a person being alone. Now, I've never discussed this with the big experts in Chassidus, but in my humble opinion, hisboinenus is an avodah for an intellectual. Hisboidedus is an avodah for a mystic, for a spiritual person. Because it's a very different kind of an exercise. It's not an intellectually engaged exercise. It's a clearing your consciousness, open yourself up to subconsciousness kind of an effort, kind of an endeavor, which is what meditation is. And a person whose identity is impure, when they do these kinds of things, garbage comes out. In other words, there's a very good reason why, very logical reason why, the Rebbe held that meditation should be used strictly for medicine, for healing mental issues, emotional issues, and that is derech avodas Hashem. Not necessarily, I don't want to say this for sure because this is an interpretation, not necessarily because it has no place in Yiddishkeit, but because it has no place in Yiddishkeit for people like you and me. There were prophets once upon a time. Prophets were very, very pure people, very clear people. And you know what else? And this is something we don't want to hear because it so goes against our very, very essence and our very culture. They were infinitely disciplined. Disciplined. The Rambam says about prophets that they were called giborim, strong people. And he defines it. These were individuals who were mizgaber al yitzram. They strengthened themselves. They defeated the Yetzer Hara each time. And the Yetzer Hara defeated them never, not even once. In other words, when you start dabbling in the occult, in mysticism, in ruchnias, of course, I'm talking within the parameters of Torah Semes. Is there spirituality in Yiddishkeit? Of course there's spirituality in Yiddishkeit. Now you know and I know that Chassidus is very much about spirituality. But Chassidus is very controlled and very managed. And in Chabad Chassidus, part of that control and part of that management is how intellectual it is. It's limud, it's seichel, you have to learn and understand. There isn't the ecstasy and the spirituality in a existential way, in a removed way. You're engaging your mind, and it protects a person from literally driving himself insane. Because when a person goes into his subconscious, when a person goes into his neshama, when a person explores spirituality without having his legs on the ground, if he's very pure and perfect, he'll find wholesome spirituality. But if he's not pure and perfect, all of his smallest flaws will become severe obstacles, and they can bring terrible destruction to that person because they have no control. That's what it means to be involved in a mysticism, something which is transcendent. So, what this person told me, it resonated with me. It made a lot of sense. When we're not going into the question whether meditation is part of the process which leads or doesn't lead to prophecy. But what is true is that it's an endeavor of going into a mystical realm. In other words, to, so to speak, open yourself up to, you don't know what you're going to find. We don't believe in that. We don't believe in opening yourself to whatever you're going to find and enjoy what you discover. We believe in being masters over ourselves, controlling ourselves, and living our lives with choice. What about people who undertook these kinds of journeys? The answer is they were such healthy people in their controlled level of living that when they opened themselves up to something transcendent and something mystical, they knew that what they would find would be wholesome and healthy. And if a person is not a complete master over himself, these kinds of endeavors are very dangerous. They're dangerous for various reasons. First of all, they can destroy you. And second of all, they can bring you to klipa. Your ego gets involved. You start believing of yourself things which aren't true. And it can become the antithesis of Kedusha Mamish. In any case, why am I giving you this, if you will, lecture on mysticism, on meditation? And it's really, for the most part, my own personal understanding of it. I'm giving you this because what happens here in this Maamar is that the Rebbe talks about the two types of evil, the two types of challenge in our lives. There's absolute evil. There's right and wrong. There's good and evil. There's mitzvahs and averos, which for many of us is the struggle of our lives. That's where we live. We sin. We make mistakes. I don't know if I had an opportunity to mention it in these classes. I want to mention it now. Every time I mention it, I get a funny face from somebody, but I'm going to mention it anyway. Nelson Mandela died a few months ago. And the few seconds that I put the radio on to hear something about his life, I heard someone quote him, that someone referred to him as a saint. And he said, no, I'm not a saint, I'm an ordinary man. Unless a saint means a sinner who never stops trying. We, for the most part, are sinners who never stop trying. When we're sinners who never stop trying, we're dealing with Yetzer Hara on a basic level. And when you deal with Yetzer Hara on a basic level, all you have to do is not sin. No! And how pretty it is or how not pretty it is doesn't matter. But then there's a second stage. And the second stage is much more subtle. The second stage is much more nuanced. The second stage is we're not dealing anymore with evil and good, sin and merit, right and wrong. You're dealing with good and better. You're dealing with discipline. You're dealing with self-control. You're dealing with iskafia. You're dealing with managing yourself, not as a human being, but as a spiritual being. And here, we're in a very, very gray area. The example that Rebbe is going to bring up is Kadesh Atzmecha B'Mutalach. Kadesh Atzmecha B'Mutalach means the idea that people have to manage permitted things. Not only we're not allowed to sin, we're not allowed to indulge in the pursuit of delights and pleasures. It's not a sin. But there's a special mitzvah, and of course the Alter Rebbe holds, based on the Sefer Charedim HaYadua, that it's one of the Tayag mitzvahs. In Tanya chapter 27, Perek Lamed Chav Zayin. It's a very big chiddush, as we know. But whether it's a mitzvah or it's not a mitzvah, it's a part of Yiddishkeit. Now, of course, as Americans, and we are Americans, the question immediately becomes, it's not an Aveda, why am I not allowed to enjoy it? And you're right, it isn't an Aveda, and you are allowed to enjoy it. But all of us know the motto that Chassidim used to say years ago, was men tor nicht, tor men nicht, what you're not allowed, was men meg darf nicht, what's permitted you don't need. That's not a slogan of deprivation. That phrase is not simply a means of self-punishment. You know, I can enjoy steak, but I like it, so I will not have it. That's not what that idea is. There's a Hayom Yom, which says that the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim undertook that anything that they desire, they shouldn't have. Anything they desire, they shouldn't have. And the reason they did it, it wasn't about suffering, it wasn't about deprivation and making yourself suffer. It was bittul hataiva. What is bittul hataiva? What's the English translation of the word taiva? Most people translate the word taiva as desire. I translate the word taiva, and I think it's correct, as weakness. Taiva means I want something, and when I see it, I get weak in the knees. I can't stop myself. That's taiva. The Alter Rebbe's Chassidim were very sensitive to weakness. They were very, very aware of what it means discipline. They were very, very aware of what it means self-control. They were very, very aware of the idea of a person managing his life in every moment. And we're so far from these ideas. We're happy if we get through a 24-hour day and we have 10 productive hours. The Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe got through a 24-hour day. They wanted 24 productive hours. 60 minutes in each hour, 60 minutes in each second, 60 seconds in each minute of each one of those hours. And when people are that sensitive, they know what vulnerability is. They know what is the lepesach chatas revetz. They know what things are what they call in the culture the triggers that bring to sin. And it begins with weakness. It begins with giving in to yourself. So they decided to never give in, never. If they want something, they shouldn't have it. Now, from our perspective, these were people who loved to suffer. From their perspective, these were people who wanted to live life to the fullest. And to live life to the fullest, you have to manage it the mostest. And you manage it by not allowing weakness to manage you. Like the Maimon Chazal, Rishoyim Liba B'Shus. When certain weaknesses come our way, we snap. You see chocolate and you become dizzy. You become weak at the knees. You have no self-control. So this is a second dimension. The first dimension is not sinning. A sin you're not allowed to commit. No one is justified in doing an aveda. The second dimension is the managing of one's spirit. To be more and more a balabayas over self. To master oneself. We call this iskafia. Not giving in to temptation. Not giving in to weakness. It's not a sin at all. But we all appreciate that the nature of weakness is that weakness begets weakness. We start off weak and become weaker, and we become weaker and become weaker. And to be a Jew on the second dimension, which means going beyond the step of not sinning and doing what we must, to being spiritually engaged, involves this kind of discipline. Or to say it in different words, this Maamar is a journey, is about a journey. The baseline, the first level of the journey, is the journey from evil into good. But then there is many higher levels of the journey. The higher levels of the journey have a greater expectation and a greater demand of us because they're offering a much finer, a much more sensitive, a much more lofty return and reward, which is not just that I'm doing what God wants and not doing what God says not to do. I'm actually engaging in relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when we engage in a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there is a requirement to have a greater level of perfection. I was once asked by somebody how to translate Kabbalah Seil, Bittul, Kabbalah Seil. And I told him 3 points, and I believe this is what Chassidus holds. The first idea of Kabbalah Seil is self-control and discipline. The Eibusher says, don't do this. And you say, I want to do it. And you listen to God and you don't do it. Why? Why? Because you don't want to be an animal. You want to be a human being. You don't want to become weak by giving into weaknesses. You want to be strong by strengthening yourself over weaknesses. Kabbalah Seil Machshmai means teaching yourself self-control. I say this all the time. There's only one thing in the universe we can actually control. And that's ourselves. And so many of us are trying to control so many things other than ourselves, because when it comes to ourselves, we have so little self-control. What is the meaning of the word freedom? I've told this to you many times before. What is the meaning of the word freedom? Freedom means, not I can do whatever I want. That's nonsense. That's hippie. That's American. Freedom means I can tell myself to do anything and actually do it. Freedom means the power over me to give myself an instruction and to carry it through. Slavery means I can give myself an instruction, I don't have the will, I don't have the strength, I don't have the courage to carry it out. Where do we lose that will? In taivas, not necessarily in sin. We lose our will in the habit of weakness. Where do we gain that will? In discipline, in not giving in to weakness. That's the first idea of Kabbalah Seil. So Kabbalah Seil is serving us. We benefit from Kabbalah Seil, we become better people. The second level of Kabbalah Seil is an evet, a slave. We have a master, he gives us instructions, and we must do what he says. The third level of Kabbalah Seil is a soldier. And soldiers not only do accept the will of their masters, they're ready to sacrifice their lives. These are 3 different levels in Kabbalah Seil. And when you're talking about Kabbalah Seil, about not sinning and doing mitzvahs on a basic level, it doesn't matter whether it's pretty or not. When you're going beyond that, to finer levels, because you want a greater return. You don't want your journey simply to me and I did what Hashem wanted. But you want your journey to be an engagement with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have to have a higher standard. And this higher standard involves much more effort, much more Kabbalah Seil Malchus Shamayim. And here, not only what we do, but why we do, the kavanah, the tam, whether it's Tov Shabbaneg or Rash Shabbaneg, is very important. And this is what's wrong with the spirituality in America. America is a place of many, many spiritual people. And of course, a lot of these spiritual people today, Baruch Hashem, are drawn to Yiddishkeit. But it's spirituality that's not grounded. It's not grounded in discipline. And of course, at the very least, it has to be grounded in mitzvahs ma'asiyos. You can't decide that because of some spiritual end, you can violate a certain mitzvah to get you to a certain spiritual high. Because that's not Yiddishkeit, it's not sustainable, it can be self-destructive, and it's against the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A person has to have discipline, and on top of that discipline, he can keep mitzvahs, and he can learn Torah and seek spirituality, but at the very least, the kiyum of mitzvahs ma'asiyos must be. This Maamar is going to the second level now, and talking about this, so to speak, finer level of discipline, and underscoring how when you're talking about higher levels of discipline, the standard of that discipline is much more fine. How? Very simple. V'hamin abeis, line 15. The second category, hu beheter. We're no longer dealing with sinning, not sinning and doing mitzvahs. On the initial level, first of all, you're on your own. Second of all, we don't care if it's pretty or not pretty, just don't sin. But on the second level, we're talking about permitted things. Sha'afilu beheter, notwithstanding that it's a kosher food, for example. Amr Chazal says in the Gemara, Kadesh atzmecha b'mutalach, halify yourself, be holy in permitted things. Shalayi and novel b'reshus ha'teira. Do not be a person who's technically frum and spiritually abominable, as the Ramban describes at the beginning of Parshas Kadeshim. In other words, you can keep all the mitzvahs, never do any avedas, and be a slob, be sleazy, be schmutzig, because every heter and every excuse and every explanation you know, because you're a big scholar, so you're technically frum, but your approach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is completely distracted by weakness and nonsense. But now you're dealing with a finer type of evil, a higher type of evil. And since the evil you're dealing with is higher and finer, you need much more care. What does much more care? You can't manage it yourself. You can't decide for yourself how you're going to spiritually grow. And the Pasuk says, Tzarech lahagdim chachmasei. Needs to be wisdom. And where do we get this wisdom from? From Meisha V'Yad. So there's Aile Massei b'nei Yisrael l'shatzim eretz Mitzrayim. The first layer, the first dimension of the journey, which is practically learning Torah and doing mitzvahs and not sinning. This is our own. But then there is B'yad Meisha V'Yad. When a person's journey advances to a higher level, to a sensitive level, a more subtle level, you need the help of Meisha V'Yad, because when you try to manage your own spirituality on your own, you will mismanage it. Because of ego and because of weakness, you need Meisha V'Yad. And he explains why you need both of them. Moshe Sheshvina de Malka. Moshe is the Unterführer, the leader of the Chasin to the Chuppah. Aaron Sheshvina de Matronisa. Aaron is the one who leads the queen, which is Knesset Yisrael, which is us, to the Chuppah as well. So Moshe brings God to us, and Aaron brings us to God. What does that mean? Moshe's method and technology and technique brings God to us. Aaron's method and technique brings us to God. Why do you have to have Moshe and Aaron? Because when you're talking about final levels, and if you do it on your own, it's going to become terrible. Lower levels, doesn't matter what the motivation is. Higher levels of Yiddishkeit require a much more fine measure of management, and to this end, you need the help of Moshe and Aaron. So the rest of the Maamar is going to explain what Moshe gives and what Aaron gives, and how these are two methods of managing ourselves on the finer levels of Avodah. So we can in fact approach godliness, I don't want to use the word prophecy, let's put this word enlightenment, Ruach HaKodesh, a spiritual connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe uses one method to manage, Aaron uses a different method to manage, and we need both. And the Rebbe continues on line 19, Pirush Shushvin the Malka, first of all, the translation of the words. The Shushvin, the Unterfir, the one who leads, the king, to the Chuppah Shumei as HaMelech, he brings the king, which is God Almighty, to join with this world. In other words, Shebechin, the Seviv, called the level of godliness called Seviv. Yesheda should rest on a level called Shriya, Hashra, Betachtenim, in the lowest realms. Now the word Hashra should be separated from the word Hislapshus, like it says in Egeres the Kedesh Chav Gimel. Hislapshus means to be revealed, and revealed means to be limited. Hashra means to be manifest in its essential state. In other words, to be revealed, but not by being compromised. Like it says in the Medrash HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mitzvah Hashem as a desire. Sheila did to have a home for himself in the lowest worlds. And there is an initiative, there is an effort, there is an individual whose role is to bring Hashem into this world. How do we make this world home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Through Torah and mitzvahs, Shehem, Amshachas Alakusay Yizbarach, Torah and mitzvahs both bring godliness into this world. And the Alter Rebbe's point is going to be that through Torah and mitzvahs, we bring the Eibishter into this world. And bringing the Eibishter into the world through Torah and mitzvahs is Sheshvina de Malka. Is bringing the king into the world. That's Moshe's role. And of course, as you will know, I'm very great at suspense, so I will not keep it. Sheshvina de Malka, Aranakoyin, this is Tefillah. We have three things. Torah, Aveda, Gemilas Chasodim. Torah and Gemilas Chasodim is bringing the Eibishter into this world through Moshe Rabbeinu, and Aveda Tefillah is raising us up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to Stavei Devar. So he begins to talk about Torah. Line 22. The whole Torah is the names of God. In other words, every idea of Torah Shebeksav is revealing Ein Sof. Shebechin Shem Hu B'Yossi is because the names of God have letters, but behind those letters is Ein Sof, is godliness. We don't fully apprehend, we don't experience the godliness when we learn the Torah. Because when you and I sit and learn Torah, we understand maybe a little bit with our minds. But the godliness which is behind that idea is completely beyond our comprehension. Not only when we learn Torah do we not get the God that's behind the Torah, moreover, when we learn the Torah, we do not get the godliness which is behind the Torah. And the Rebbe's point in Rabbi Isai is that when you learn Torah, you're bringing godliness into this world, whether you see it and experience it or not. And the Torah is Mogen Matzah. The Torah protects. Learning the Torah and keeping the Torah guards a person. In other words, what causes that the discipline of a person in Devarim Amutarim, Kadesh Atzmacha B'mut Allah, should be in a healthy and a constructive way, that he does it through Torah. Because Torah is God's wisdom, and when you learn Torah, even if you don't experience the godliness, that Torah preserves and protects, as opposed to a person who uses other methods. Mitzvahs, line 25, the same is true through mitzvahs and the Malka, the mitzvah called the limbs of the king. The parallel between limbs and mitzvahs is just like the physical limbs of the person's body. Yesh chayis and neshama, inside the body there is a soul, inside each limb there is a nefesh. The same is true in each mitzvah. Chayis is divine, this godly life. When a Jew does a mitzvah, for example, Shemasata Vitalis, Tzitzis, Babeke wraps of Vitalis and Tzitzis in the morning. So the Tzitzis is a garment, is a kli. Mam Sheikh Allah Bechin a Seviv Kalam, and he brings out himself a level of Seviv Kalam. She a Chayv of Allah that should hover above, like it says in the Geras in Tiny Perek Mamalov. V'chein, but Tefillin, the same is true with Tefillin, no Amshachas Achtas, it brings down unity. So there is the idea of learning Torah, that although we're not sensitive to the godliness of the Torah, in the Torah there's godliness, and the same is true when we do mitzvahs. Although each mitzvah is one limb, one type of godliness, and we're not even sensitive to the godliness of each individual mitzvah, we're nevertheless bringing it down. So the Rebbe is saying, you want to manage your own spirituality, be frum. And to the contrary, the more spiritual you want to be, the frummer you have to be. Tragically, unfortunately, you see so much that people who get involved in the spiritual movements become negligent in the details of halacha and Torah mitzvahs. And they don't understand the damage that they're doing themselves. Because the culture sees Yiddishkeit as a constraint. The more ruchniistic you want to be, the more Yiddishim you need to be. The more precise, the more exact, and the more consistent one must be in his Yiddishkeit. That keeps the spirituality healthy and humble. And the Rebbe says that's why when you learn Torah and you do mitzvahs, that's the basis for the kind of discipline which brings you to the more fine type of connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a healthy and a constructive way. And through this, I'm on line 29, evil departs from the person. And not necessarily gross evil connected to an Aveda, but evil even on the level of weakness. The Pasuk says, as wax melts in the presence of fire, evil is uprooted in the presence of Elokim. Fire doesn't burn up the wax. It just heats up the environment and the wax melts by itself. The same is true by Har Sinai. Yossi said there was fire. They descended on with a fire. Because this fire came to uproot and to remove the smaller, the finer deficiencies that may have existed. And I have to be honest, in the Maamar Aile Massei Likutei Torah, he doesn't bring the source of this Piskam, Keitzim, Kisuchim, Be'esh Yatzasei, so I didn't look it up. But this is the contextual idea, that the fire of Torah has to remove the finer deficiencies. And what is this fire? The fire is Torah. In other words, you want to be a spiritual person. As Torah teaches spirituality, number one, Torah and mitzvahs. And number two, more Torah and mitzvahs. Because the Torah and mitzvahs create the refinement in a healthy way, in a humbling way, at the ruchnius, which follows will be ideal. And if chas v'shalom you think, I'm a religious person, now I want to be a spiritual person, and spirituality involves relaxation and a departure from the preciseness of Torah and mitzvahs, you're leading yourself, Rahman l'tzal, down a path which is going to go in a very, very not healthy way. Says the Rebbe behind the Bechinas Moshe. And this Torah and these mitzvahs, which are God's gift to us, that give us a power to be disciplined and to control our evil on the finest levels as a road towards real ruchnias. That koyach comes from Moshe. Here you're not on your own. And there's many ways of translating it, but my way of translating it is, you can't trust yourself. You need Moshe Rabbeinu. Only a Rebbe, only a tzaddik can teach a person how he can take these journeys in a constructive way. Bechinas das, because Moshe's depth, Moshe's integrity. Sheyedeya. Shehu be'echad. Moshe Rabbeinu knows on the deepest level the idea that the Eibishter is one and the whole world is part of that oneness. And with the help of Moshe's depth, in other words, not simple intellectualism, but intellectualism connected with that integrity and depth of Moshe Rabbeinu. B'masha amru chazal. I'm on line 32 now. What says in the Gemara, a person would never sin unless they were invaded by a spirit of temporary insanity, called the spirit of folly. It's discussed in Chanin chapter 24, and of course in Kuntres L'Mayin at length. And what do we know about this Ruach Shtos? It envelops us. It makes us insane. It makes us stupid. To use the example I gave before I translated the word taiva. The word taiva I translated as weakness. Ruach Shtos means temporarily insane. What's a temporary insanity? The Alter Rebbe says in Tanya chapter 13, I can do this and still be normal. I'm sure you've heard the mashal of the chicken. There was this person who had some kind of a breakdown and decided he was a chicken. So he took off all his clothes and he sat on the floor and he lived like a chicken. He defecated wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted. He ate scraps from the floor, never washed, and the people couldn't live. So they tried all kinds of cures and medications, but he's a chicken. Go argue with a chicken. So someone came along with a simple solution. He also took off all of his clothing and got under the table. He's also a chicken. And the two chickens now had company in a coop. But after a couple of days, this second chicken washed himself. And the first chicken says, excuse me, what kind of chicken are you? Chickens don't wash. He says, look, you could wash and still be a chicken. So he also washed. And a few days later, he started to clean himself. And he said, how could you clean yourself and be a chicken? He says, look, you can clean yourself. Eventually he put his clothing on. He started eating with a fork and a knife. He sat by the table. You can still be a chicken and do all of these things. Just like it's true In the marshal, the nimshal is a person can say, I can make this Aveda, I'm still a good Jew. The other Aveda, I'm still a good Jew. The third Aveda, I can stop doing this mitzvah, I'm still a good Jew. That's the Ruach Shtus. The Ruach Shtus is one step further than Taiva. Taiva is weakness, and Ruach Shtus is a dishonesty. It's beyond just having no self-control. It's just lying to oneself and telling yourself, I'm still good, even though I can do this, that, and the other. So the Alter Rebbe calls it shtus. The Gemara calls it shtus. Why? Because if you would regain your sanity and you would stop lying to yourself, you would realize how ridiculous it is. So the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, the Ruach Shtus is machas al ha'emes. This spirit of folly blinds you to the truth. But if, for whatever reason, the clarity would return to this person, shafilu kal shabakam, the most careless Jew, ein eretz eliyas peidekel, does not want to throw off the yoke of heaven. Moreover, umeiser nafshel kedushas Hashem yizbarach, would sacrifice his life for the sanctity of God's name. In other words, when he comes to a point where he can no longer tell himself, I can do this and still be a good Jew, he'll give his life. And Alter Rebbe says, now work backwards and tell yourself that even the smallest Aveda, only a shaita will perform. Ve'ein tzarech shum izbanus, and it does not require any contemplation, because he knows that he's a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You see, the Alter Rebbe in Tanya talks about the ultimate sin. The ultimate sin is idol worship. Idol worship means I tell myself I'm cut off from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Alter Rebbe says a Jew would never do that. And of course his question is, so if he wouldn't do idol worship, why would he eat not kosher or commit adultery? And the answer is Ruach Shtus. What does Ruach Shtus say? This cuts me off from the Eibishter, and this Aveda, in quotes, I could still be a good Jew and do it. But the truth of the matter is, it's Meridib Melech Macham Nocham HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There really isn't a difference between a big Aveda and a little Aveda. The Ruach Shtus convinces me, allows me to lie to myself, as I said before, and convince myself that this is a big Aveda, this is a little Aveda. It's really not true. Says the Alter Rebbe, when a person distracts himself and he thinks or speaks dvarim gufnim, worldly things, which are not connected to serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in his mind, this is a much smaller Aveda than Avodah Zarah. But in truth, he's separating himself from the oneness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if he was only paying attention, if not for the dishonesty, which is called Ruach Shtus, he would never desire it. Just like naturally a child would never agree to leave his father's table. So there are fundamentals, those lines we would never cross. There's many other things, there are lines that we cross, and our excuse is not that it's only heter. Our excuse is that I'm still connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is the Ruach Shtus. And the Alter Rebbe says, to overcome these two ills, if you will, the taiva, the weakness ill, and the Ruach Shtus ill, you need a koyach. And that koyach has to be a healthy koyach. And in order for that koyach to be healthy, it cannot be a self-made koyach of discipline and self-honesty. It has to come from Torah. It has to come from Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the idea that the Eibishter gave us a good inheritance, which is the Torah and the mitzvahs effect that the discipline that we need should be a healthy discipline. The pasuk says, even darkness cannot black. We find in Rishonim and Bereshis on the second pasuk that it goes in the Dal Yisei, there's Cheshech Ezesh, Adeshit and Amban, I think. And of course he means the fire of Taivas. Even a negative fire cannot interrupt. Why? Because of the keich we have from Moshe Rabbeinu. This is the idea of halifying yourself when it comes to permitted things. That even though it's permitted, this idea that's permitted is on the level of the body. But in as much as we want godliness to rest upon us, And in order for godliness to rest upon us, we need a much higher level of discipline, which is the Eibishter's godliness. You can't rely on this permission. This is what the pasuk concludes: you should be holy, and you will eventually become holy. So when a person is on the first step of the journey, what's the first step of the journey? The fight of good and evil. That's basic. It doesn't matter how we fight as long as we win. But when we're talking about the higher levels of the fight, we must understand that the foundation is Yiras Shamayim, is precise, isn't Torah and mitzvahs. Because only then are we disciplined in a healthy way as the basis for the Ruach HaKodesh, which we wish to bring to ourselves. So, in as much as this second level is concerned, Moshe Rabbeinu brings the Eibush to us through Torah and mitzvahs. And now the Rebbe continues, line 40. The other support that we need is Aron Akei, and he is the Shushvin. He brings the queen, that means ourselves, to the Eibishter. He brings and arouses a thirst for the Eibishter through davening. So his inyan is, Aron Akei's task is to make us desire HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moshe Rabbeinu's task is to bring the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu onto us through Torah and mitzvahs, to give us healthy discipline. Aron HaKohen's method is making us want God. Shehu Hiseder is Chukum Imata L'mayla. He arouses a thirst from us to God from below. Shuai Tefillah, which is satisfied or aspired to in davening. Which also, as the pasuk says, "So Malach Nafshay thirst for Hakadosh Baruch Hu, His bond and His bepsuka Jezim Kedim Krishma V'Achakar Shemagil V'Yafta Shebekriyashma." All of these stages of davening are want, are thirst, are longing. And again, the idea is that when a person wants Hakadosh Baruch Hu with an emes, that desire for Hakadosh Baruch Hu is also a shmira against the pursuit of ruchnius, being distracted. And he explains why a person wants HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Nefesh kol adam, the soul of a person, mishtei tekes, wants God. Rak, how come you and I don't feel like we want God? Sha'ahav begolos, because our love and desire for God is hidden, is in exile. Umiseres and covered over megol, Adam shchini mohem, that when you're in Edem, in Golos, the shchina within you is also in Golos. Pirush, this means apapisha esem maisa Edem. We may be acting on the outside like the goy, like Edom. Inside of us, there is a desire for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, there is an exercise, there is an avoid of tefillah to overcome that galus and reveal the thirst which exists inside of the yid, v'yislayev leiv ha'adam, and a person's heart must be inspired, li'ez batel negdi yizbarach, to be got batel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. For example, we see Davar Gashmi on the physical level. That when you examine priorities, there are lower priorities and higher priorities. And when you compare a higher priority to a lower priority, the lower priority becomes inconsequential. And he explains it. Ma'aseh shalom. Davar Gashmi Ma'aseh shalom. A physical deed that a person does, even if it's a sophisticated one, like write a book, compose a song, produce a piece of art or sculpture. Batel neged ruchnius, compared to a spiritual delight that's insignificant. Kemoi, what is an example for spirituality? Machshava, thought. What a person can visualize in his imagination is far more lofty and meaningful than what he can do physically. Now, of course, what you can visualize in your imagination is only in your imagination. But in terms of the spiritual worth, it's far greater than what you're able to do physically. And he brings the Lashon HaGemara of Zeh, what the Gemara says, Raglei Achayis Keneged Kulam. They're all levels of worlds. And the highest is the angels. And the feet of the angels are equal to everything that's below it. Pirush. Madrega shehi hatachtena bebchinas chayis. The lowest level of malachim, shehu ruchnius, which is still spiritual, is keneged kulam, is completely superior to everything which is physical. You cannot compare a physical thing to a spiritual thing. And he qualifies it with a physical example. Even about physical things. In other words, comparing one physical thing to another physical thing. Nema, we know, the earth is like a point, a seed of mustard compared to the massiveness of the heavens. Although the heavens are only also physical things. So how much more so, when you compare a physical pleasure, a physical meaningful experience to a spiritual meaningful experience, spirituality is much more. Within spiritual levels themselves, each spiritual thing compared to a spirituality which is higher than it. Which also says in the Pasuk, in other words, if all of the worlds are nothing compared to the feet of the Malachim, the thighs of the Malachim are still higher, and the wings of the Malachim are still higher, and each level higher renders the levels below insignificant. And ultimately, when you're talking about Hashem Himself, it's all nothing. It's all inconsequential. And Aaron Akayin's role is to create a thirst in you, not for angels, not for wings, not for physical or even spiritual things, for Hashem Himself. And that's the Shmira. Like Dr. Rabbi used to say, I want you. That's why the pasuk we say in davening, all of us will raise up God forever. Will never finish raising Him up. No matter how much we lift Him up, it's not enough. There's more to exalt. Moreover, English it has no limit. As much as we can exalt Him, He's infinitely more exalted than we could ever expect to exalt Him. And therefore, Aaron HaKohen says, want God, want this truth which is so far away from us. And just like Moshe Rabbeinu in his Torah and mitzvahs is creating a discipline in Kadesh Aspecha B'Mut which is healthy, Aaron HaKohen saying that in davening you should want God and not want the lights of God is creating the discipline in the opposite direction and raising ourselves up like Kadosh Baruch. So he points out now, you could make the case that if you'll meditate on how great God is, and how far away from us He is, you'll get discouraged. You'll feel like, He's so far away from me, I have nothing to do with Him. Says Alter Rebbe, that's not the case. Ki Ad Rebbe, to the contrary, Shabbazed, the greater one is, His Karvos Etzleinu, the more He can come close to us. Since everything to Hashem is inconsequential, and to Him all is nothing. For this very reason, ein hefsek, there's nothing separating between Him and us. And therefore, there is an exercise of davening, to meditate, to be mizbainin, and wanting to get close to Him Himself, above all levels. And this desire to get close to Him Himself, like Moshe's Torah and mitzvahs, is the healthy shmita necessary for the higher aspects in Avodas Hashem. This is what Aaron HaKohen does. He connects us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So this is the second step in the Aile Massei. The first step in the Aile Massei you do on your own. The second step in Aile Massei has to be B'yad Moshe V'yad. So what's the order? First Moshe, and then Aaron. Now we're on line 56. Achine Ksiv, the pasuk says, who Aaron or Moshe, who Moshe V'yad. We understand now that Moshe and Aaron combined represent those personalities that raise us to higher levels of avodah and guard us and protect us, that it should be healthy. But which comes first? In our pasuk it says B'yad Moshe V'Aaron. We have other places where Aaron's name comes before Moshe. So the Alter Rebbe interprets, sometimes godliness comes before davening. But on other occasions, you have to begin your day with davening and wanting God. This gives you the power to learn and to do. In other words, there is an idea that God gives us keach, and the idea that we want God. Which comes first alternates. Sometimes first you have to want God, and then God will give you keach. On other occasions, God will give you koyach, and then you become closer to HaKadosh Baruch. Now, since we're having this class on this Maamar, based on the principle of a journey, I want to close the class also with a story which is also very famous, and this story is taken in the Likutei Torah, that the holy Maggid of Mezrich was one of the last great tzaddikim to join the movement of the Holy Baal Shem Tov. He was, of course, his greatest disciple in Maamar Aile Massei. He was his successor. And he lived literally in abject poverty, indescribable poverty. There was a Yid Arov who had come to the Baal Shem Tov for Shabbos, and he was telling the Baal Shem Tov as he was leaving goodbye, and telling him his route. So the Baal Shem Tov said to him, on the way you'll stop in Mezrich, go into Mezrich, you'll find a Yid who is one of my greatest Talmidim, Betel the Melamed, and go into him and send him regards from me. So he came to Mezrich, he asked people who's Betel the Melamed. He had difficulty finding people who knew who he was. Eventually he found people, and he went to the edge of town. There were these streets that the houses were so close together that the mud never dried, not even in the summertime. There were little, tiny, depressed neighborhoods. And he went to the Maggid's house. The lintel was too low, and the house was sunk into the ground, and it was musky and smelly and dirty. There was no chair, there was no tables. There were stumps of wood and planks of wood. And the Maggid was learning with his children, Talmidim, who was a Melamed. And he said hello to him, and he told him that he had regards to the Baal Shem Tov. The Maggid, of course, asked him to come back after the Cheder, which he did. And then he came back, and they spent some quality time farbrengen together. And eventually this Rav could not contain himself, and he says to the Maggid, how could you live in such poverty? So the Maggid, of course, answered him with a question. Tell me how you live at home. He says, well, I have one room and another room and a third room, and I have furniture, and I have pots, and I have pans, and I have closets, and I have shelves, and I have so on. He says, and when you travel, do you have all of these amenities, all of these good things? He says, no. Unterwegs. When a person travels, he puts up with inconveniences. He says, how come he can't put up with the inconveniences at home? So he answers him, in der Heim is anders. When you go home, things are different. So the Maggid repeated again and again, in der Heim is anders. In der Heim is anders. In der Heim is anders. Implying that we are on a trip. And der Heim is Gan Eden. That's where the Neshama came from, Ayin Basa, and where the Neshama is going to, Lona Tehelich. And over there, you have to have Kisei Shit, Bite, Kisei Shulchan Menera. But unterwegs, as we travel through life, we have to remember this is Hachnes Atzmacha Lepruzder Ketesha Tikones Letraklan. This is going into a hallway to reach an end. But of course, Chassidus teaches us the message of Pnimius, which means that the moment we're in right now is the most important moment. And we have to take this journey with maximum effort, and with Hashem's help, have maximum success.